I thought about the three men that were on the crosses the day Jesus was crucified. The three men. And I'd like to take a look at those three men this morning, the two thieves and then Jesus, and just sort of get a picture in our mind. And I know we think right away, well, these other two were thieves. I did a little research and found a couple things that were interesting to me. Matthew just simply says, well, it says that they had two thieves that were on the cross. Two thieves were crucified with him, one on the right hand, another on the left. And then it talks about how the chief priests and others were mocking Jesus. And it says there that the thieves also which were crucified with him cast the same in his teeth. It's kind of an unusual statement. It says the thieves, plural, were doing the same thing. They were also mocking Jesus. But then it says, cast the same in his teeth, and it's singular. I picked that up. Sounds like they were both mocking at one point and then turned into a singular. I don't know, was there a change of heart right there, or is it just a play on words? I even went to the Greek and looked it up, or the Greek, and it has the exact same words there, and I don't know why it goes from plural to singular. I don't really know that. It's kind of interesting, but it kind of, because of what I'm going to share, it kind of is a play of words there that I picked up on. I hadn't noticed it before that it's plural and then singular. But anyway, we'll let that be as it is. If you go over to Mark, it says, and with him they crucified two thieves, the one on the right hand and the other on his left. And the scripture was fulfilled, which saith, he was numbered with the transgressors. Again, that's an interesting statement. He was numbered with the transgressors. So in other words, it almost appears like he was made to be one of them. Again, we'll come back to that thought, share about that thought a little bit later. In John, it says, then delivered he them therefore unto them to be crucified, and they took Jesus and led him away, and he bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him and two other with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the midst. So again, it mentions that there were two thieves, two crucified with Jesus, and Jesus in the middle. And it's interesting that those three accounts of this, what took place here, just simply kind of matter of fact state what happened. That's basically all it says. But if we turn to Luke, and I'd like to use this for our text, if you want to turn there, you can. I'm going to read down through this, and then we want to look at some of this. Luke chapter 23, we'll be reading from verse 26. And as they led him away, they laid hold upon one Simon a Cyrenian, coming out of the country, and on him they laid the cross, that he might bury it after Jesus. And there followed him a great company of people, and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him. But Jesus, turning unto them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming, in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in a green tree, what shall be done in the dry? And there were also two other malefactors led with him to be put to death. And when they were come to the place which is called Calvary, there they crucified him and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then said Jesus, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they parted his raiment and cast lots. And the people stood beholding. And the rulers also with them derided him, saying, He saved others, let him save himself, if he be the Christ, the chosen of God. And the soldiers also mocked him, coming to him and offering him vinegar, and saying, If thou be the King of the Jews, save thyself. And a superscription was also written over him in letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, This is the King of the Jews. And one of the malefactors which were hanged railed on him, saying, If thou be Christ, save thyself and us. But the other answering rebuked him, saying, Dost not thou fear God, seeing thou art in the same condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we receive the due rewards of our deeds. But this man hath done nothing amiss. And he said unto Jesus, Lord, remember me when thou comest into thy kingdom. And Jesus said unto him, Verily I say unto thee, today thou shalt be with me in paradise. In this account, it clearly states that one of these thieves mocked him and the other didn't. So I go back to that other passage in Matthew, and I'm like, well, maybe that's why it goes from plural to singular. It seemed like they all everyone that was there kind of mocked, but all of a sudden, this one thief was not mocking. He was the only sensible one in the group, it appears. There's a lot in this, and I'm just going to mention a few things for the sake of time this morning, but there's a lot in this that we could look at. Let's look at the thief number one. I'm going to call him thief number one, the one that was mocking. What kind of a person was he? What picture do you get in your mind? Anyone?
No fear of God.
No fear of God. Right. What else? Sorry he got caught. Okay.
He's pretty bold.
Bold. I just wrote down a couple words here. Rebellious. Just a rebellious criminal. We've seen people that get caught and maybe they're caught in something and especially hardened criminals, it seems like they're cursing and swearing and kicking, and that kind of reminds me of this criminal. That's just kind of the picture that I get. It's interesting. I tried to dig into this a little bit more. Adam Clark mentions that there was a bishop, one of the bishops from the time, that said that most times when they took people and hung them on a cross because they were a thief, it was not because they went out and stole someone's chickens. I'm using my own term there. That wasn't the crime that had taken place here. Most often, when a person was crucified on a cross by the Romans, it simply meant that they were the ones who rose up against the Roman government. Most often they were Jews. Now, if you look at the situation here at this time, the Jews were under the Romans. The Romans had the rule over the country, but the Jews sort of acted independently as their own little government under the Roman government, which is kind of unusual. But that was the setup. And so the Jews kind of had their own little nation under the Roman government. And most often when these criminals of this type were crucified, they were actually Jews that sort of rose up against the Roman government and rebelled against the Roman government and refused to pay taxes. That was one thing they were noted for, refused to pay their taxes to the Romans. Another thing they often did is every time they had a chance, they would steal money from the Romans or somehow take advantage of the Romans. And these people eventually would get caught, and this was the outcome. Now, that's the way this person from that time explained it. So now that kind of gives us a little bit of a different picture of what was going on here with these thieves. And so this thief got caught, thief number one, and I don't think his mind changed. His attitude was still the same. He had no desire to change at all. He was just a hardened criminal, if you could say it that way. Now, look at thief number two. What do we see in thief number two? Anyone? What does it say here about him that's interesting? He had a heart of repentance. What was the first thing he did? He admitted his wrong. What's the word that he uses? I need to go back and look at it. Dost thou not fear God, seeing thou art also in the same condemnation? For we indeed justly. We're getting what we deserved. We were wrong in what we did. Basically is what he's saying. He said we got what we deserved. But he doesn't stop there. What does he do next? Defends Christ. He recognizes who Jesus is and the fact that Jesus was innocent, was not guilty, was just. That's the second thing he did. What did he do next?
He acknowledged this was not the end of the road for Jesus.
That's right. That's right. There's something interesting here that I discovered. How can this man, who is a Jew, see what he did? Who is this Messiah? How did he recognize Jesus for who he was? This thief obviously had something working in his life, right? How did he understand who Jesus was? How did he come to the point and realize that Jesus is a Messiah? And there's some other things that are interesting here. The Jews, do you think any of them really saw who Jesus was? If they did, they continued to reject, right? I think some of them were actually maybe knowledgeable as well and just resisted. Especially the leaders. They didn't want to give up their positions, so they stuck with the program. But it's interesting to note here that this man recognized Jesus as Messiah. And in some ways, he was, how would you say, he saw into spiritual things more than the very people that were crucifying Jesus. It's pretty interesting that we see that. Where did he get this spiritual insight? Was it because his mind was thinking? Was it because maybe he was seeking? You see, his repentant heart took him, I think, to this place where he could understand who Jesus was, the Messiah. He could understand what he needed to do to be right with God because he knew his time was coming. And I honestly believe that anyone at that time, if they had a heart to do what was right and truly wanted to seek God, they could recognize Jesus as a Messiah. He was willing to do that. And yes, he was kind of up against the fence, so to speak. But he was willing to apply what knowledge he had and seek for more and find it. And through that, he understood who Jesus was. He understood that this is Jesus. This is the Messiah. He's the very one that can save my soul. He's the very one that is in God's plan. How many of you have ever heard the song, Thank God for the Man on the Middle Cross? I did not hear it until like a week and a half ago. Thank God for the Man on the Middle Cross. There's several different songs that have the Man on the Middle Cross, but Alistair Begg kind of gives up. That someone took a clip from one of Alistair Begg's sermons and sort of put it as an introduction to that song. How many of you have heard that? Okay, that's what I heard for the first time about a week and a half ago. It's interesting, and I don't quite agree with Alistair. He says that this man didn't understand justification. He didn't understand, a lot of things. He just simply came to Jesus and said, Lord, I want to be in your kingdom. And Jesus took him home. And he kind of gives a picture that when he gets to heaven, someone asks him, well, what do you know about justification? Well, he doesn't understand anything. After studying this, I kind of disagree with the thoughts that he shared there. it seems like this man knew what he was doing. He knew what was happening. He was involved. He was there, and it was making sense to him. It's also interesting. Did you notice that Pilate knew who Jesus was? Pilate knew who Jesus was. Remember his wife told him have nothing to do with this just man? And then Pilate comes out and washes his hands. And what does he do? In this account, it says that he put this subscription over him. This, I don't know what you call it, a sign or whatever. Said, "This is the King of the Jews." In one of the other accounts, it says that the chief priest went back to him and wanted Pilate to change that and make it say, "This man claims he is the King of the Jews." Now we're starting to look at Jesus, the man on the middle cross here. But Pilate said, "No, what I have written, I have written." And Pilate just simply said, "This is the King of the Jews." I think Pilate, just as well as thief number 2, saw exactly into what was going on here. Pilate knew who Jesus was. That's why he wanted nothing to do with the crucifixion. Yet, in his mind, somehow, I'm not sure how he could justify himself, but somehow he turned him over to the Jews and let them do what he did. Pilate at this point had the authority to say, "No, you're not going to touch him." But he didn't. And I don't understand that all. Some people have studied Pilate's life from there on and claimed that he was a miserable person from this time on. I don't know all that for sure. But it's interesting that Pilate also recognized Jesus for who he was. Now let's look a little bit at Jesus. Here he is, the perfect one, the sinless one, the man on the middle cross. Who was he? Of course, we all know the answer, Messiah. He was the Messiah. He was the one sent to Israel to redeem Israel. He was sent by God for one specific purpose. What was that? What was that one specific purpose he was sent for? To save us. Jesus in his ministry often mentioned he has come to do the will of his Father. And his Father's plan, God's plan, was from the very beginning that Jesus was going to be the perfect sacrifice, sinless, blameless. He was going to be crucified for our sins, everyone's sins. And that was the will of God. And so we have the man on the middle cross. That's why he came. But the very people he came to save, the people who were called God's chosen people, God's nation, Israel, were the very ones who rejected him. And it's interesting to note that they took him and put him on a cross between two of these thieves, two of these people that rejected the Roman nation. Why did they do that? Now, do you see why they wanted Pilate to change the subscription over his name? They basically wanted to put Jesus in a position that he is rising up against the Jewish nation, just as the other two were rising against the Roman nation. You see the comparison there? There's a reason why they wanted Pilate crucified between these two individuals. These two individuals rose up against the Roman kingdom. And they wanted the appearance that Jesus is rising up against the Jewish kingdom, bringing something in from the outside that's wrong. And so they put them all in the same class, so to speak. And so when the chief priests go back to Pilate and say, "We want to change this," it should say, "He says he's the King of the Jews." Pilate said, "No, he is the King of the Jews." I see that very powerful in what Pilate put up there on the cross. And it's interesting that Pilate recognized Jesus, and there he was. That was just interesting to me. So we have Jesus. Here he is. He's on the cross. His own people that he came to die for rejected him. His personal disciples had fled at this point. It looks like some of the women were still following, probably from a distance and watching what was going on. But his own disciples fled, except for Peter. And Peter was kind of hanging around in the shadows, in the background, down through the trial. And what does Peter do? He ends up denying him, betraying him. And the very person that Jesus really loved almost throws a dagger in his back, so to speak. And so we have Jesus with all of this. First of all, he has all the sins of the world hanging on him. He knows what's coming. He knows that his life is going to have to be given. He knows what's God's will. His one by one people reject him. His very own Peter, the one he loves so much, and the one he said, I'd never do that, turns his back on him. And we see the way that Jesus was treated, and lack of sleep, lack of friends, lack of support. Seemed like everything it seems like everything left him at that point. We have the physical anguish, we have the mental anguish, the suffering, the loss of blood. We notice he was too weak already when they left Pilate's hall to go be crucified. He was too weak already to carry his own cross. And he goes, and they get Simon to carry his cross. But how do you think Jesus was feeling at this point? There was basically nothing left. Almost. He was down to his last breath, so to speak. Not exactly his last breath, because I think if we study, there was 3 hours of darkness yet before he died. But it's interesting that in all of this, Jesus was physically almost dead at this point to when they got him on the cross. He was almost dead. But here is this man, this thief, that says, Lord, remember me when you come into paradise. Jesus perked up right there. He says, you're going to be with me today in paradise, right? You see, the mission Jesus was on was to save people. He had a heart for people. His goal was to die for the sins of people and reclaim them, bring them back to God. And so here he is, so near dead. But yet in his love and compassion, he reaches out to this thief who says, you're the Messiah. Could I come with you to your kingdom? And Jesus says, of course, come on in. Today you're going to be with me in paradise. That is the heart of Jesus. And we can see that this was his mission right down to his very last breath. Now, we could go through all the things that happened to Jesus and the way they treated him and all of that. What I would like for us to see this morning is the heart of Jesus. And I think we see it, how he relates to this thief. He relates to him in a way, yes, today. Yes, you can be with me in paradise. Some of his last words were these words to the thief. And it's interesting to note that today, that's still his heart. That's why you and I are here this morning, because that heart has not changed. Yes, he died. He rose again. He's living today. He's more alive than ever, I feel. But he still has that same heart to reach down and reach out to us. Doesn't matter how bad of a sinner we were. It doesn't matter what we've done wrong. What does he say to us today? You can be with me in paradise. If you love me and follow me, you can be with me in paradise. And that's the heart of Jesus. That's why he came. That's why he did all this. Luke 19, verse 10 says, for the Son of Man is come to seek and to save that which was lost. I think that's his heart. To seek and to save that which was lost. Very simple, but it's impressive. It's a joy for us to have that. And then what does Jesus tell us? That we can be sons of God, right? Who is Jesus? He's also the Son of God. You see, Jesus didn't say, well, you can come to heaven and I'm here and God's up here and you're down here. No, Jesus said, you're one of mine. You're my brother. You're my sister. That's his heart. He is bringing us to God and to stand alongside him and to all be sons and daughters of God. And that's something beautiful that is for us today. That's what Jesus did for me and for you. I trust that as we think on those things, it can be a joy to us and can be a delight in our heart to think of the man on the middle cross. Yep, those other two were there. There was a difference in their lives. They were not the same. But the gospel is for whosoever will. And it doesn't matter how bad of a sinner we were. God says, I want you to come home and be with me. Jesus has prepared the way. Here he is. I'll turn the time to Matt.